ask questions that aren't voted. So let's go ahead and get started. Also one more thing. People usually ask, how do you get on the stream? You have to be in Radomeyer's extended circles, which usually is anybody who posts a comment at any point ever to anything he posts, especially these. So if you do want to join and you're not able to, just post a comment and Rado can go ahead and ask you. He is off stage monitoring the comments on Google Plus as well as our audio levels and everything else like that. So we are watching those. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. First question here. It's from Name. All right, Name. Chrome Android browser has a pretty compelling swipe and tab discard animations. Those are the best ever Google has come up with. Thank you. Questions. Are you planning to make those standard animations for Android? That's an excellent question, and the answer is actually I don't know. Chrome is partly open source. I haven't heard what the release plans are going to be for any of that, and as a general rule, we can't comment on upcoming features or anything along those lines. So that's actually probably a question that's better suited for the Chrome team as far as what their plans are to go and release their source, or more specifically, what parts they intend to release.
That said, they are pretty slick.
Yes, they are.
I do hope that they end up, but.
So yeah, and also I can't comment on what's going to be added to the Android framework in the future. But we'll take this as feedback. We'll let the UI team know that you guys like these and would like to see them as part of the framework. And even if we don't release them directly, we might be able to see what else we can do as far as releasing sample code or something to that effect. No promises, but we'll look into it for you. All right. So next question. How can I set a timeout for SSL sockets for a blocking read-write using the thread-safe connection manager? I found that losing network connectivity while reading or writing an SSL socket results in a 15-minute timeout on 2.2 and 2.3 devices. This is Todd from San Diego. Excellent question. Anybody else have some thoughts on this?
Yes, sometimes excellent question is a clever euphemism for we have no idea. It's it's a very specific question. Todd, are you by any chance online? Can you pop in? Pop up in the chat window, actually. That's not open.
Yeah, I do see a couple chat questions there. No, chat on the, yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Oh, Stephen Kerman was commenting that we had a lot of echo, which is apparently now fixed. Yeah, so the answer is actually we don't know. We can go ahead and look into this for you. And we'll post a comment on the stream once we find out, or on this post once we find out. But unfortunately, nobody in the room right now actually knows the answer to your question, which unfortunately does happen occasionally when we ask very specific questions like this. And
actually, what would be ideal is if you could go ahead and post the question on Stack Overflow and then link to it from the comments on the Android Developer Google Plus page. We can go in and answer it there so that it'll be more visible to anyone else who has the question.
And yeah, actually, it's the first time I've heard of that problem too.
Yeah.
I suspect there must be a way because usually when I use anything that uses SSL, I don't have a 15-minute timeout. So.
Right. I would also be curious if the issue is specific to 2.2 and 2.3 devices, or if those are just what you have on hand for testing. If you could definitively say it is not an issue on 3.0 devices or something, that might help us narrow it down a little bit.
Okay. So we'll look into it a little bit more, see if anybody on our end has heard about it. But definitely go ahead and leave a follow-up comment, Todd, and give us some more background on where you're seeing this specifically so we can try and investigate a bit further. All right. Now, I noticed a couple black boxes down there at the bottom. Are those test accounts or are those actual people?
That's actual people.
There's actual people. Okay, so I know since there are a couple people watching this, do any of you have a question that you want to ask? You're certainly welcome to unmute your video and ask us. Or ask in chat. All right, I'll take that as a no, but if there is, oh, Stephen has something to say. Ah, it's on moderator. Okay, cool. All right, so hopefully we'll get to that shortly then. How do you create the action bar spinner that you guys have in the ICS Gmail app? It looks like you have two types of items, accounts and filters, and also a non-selectable header between them. I want to create a similar spinner for my app. This is Molo from Portland, Oregon. Roman has a comment, and you do have a mic there, by the way. But yes,
Oh, I have a mic.
you have a mic, but you're not on the camera.
I'll just get on camera instead, temporarily, just to answer this question. So I posted a comment. Oh. Oh. Okay.
Yeah, those things have a pretty short range.
Then in that case, I will take this mic. Is this working? So I answered this in part in the moderator, but basically I'm pretty sure the Gmail app doesn't use the drop-down navigation mode. It probably just uses a custom view. But to do that, I mean, to create a custom view with a spinner in it should be fairly straightforward. That will solve your second problem of kind of having the spinner take up the entire width of the action bar. You basically have a custom view with a layout width equal to match parent. But the more important part of this question, how do you have a very complex, or not complex, but how do you have like a multi-view type spinner or list? That basically, you have the spinner or you have some other control that resembles a spinner, and you just have it pop up a list pop-up window. And that list pop-up window can have, it can use a list adapter, which lets you do things like section headers and whatnot. But you basically, I don't think you can really do that with the built-in drop-down navigation mode, because spinner adapters don't really let you do things like that. So I think that answers all the questions. If there's any kind of follow-up, like Trevor said, feel free to jump onto the Hangout and ask a follow-up question.
Okay, awesome, thanks. All right, next question is from Andreas in Linz. I'm not sure where Linz is, but anyway.
Austria? L-I-N-Z?
Yeah.
Austria?
Okay, well.
Linz.
Hello, Austria. Why is the view pager.decor interface in the support package not defined as public? Would be great to build our own indicators and title strips for the view pager and include it as easy as the pager title setup or pager title strip. Also an excellent question, and I'm not sure I can tell you directly, but generally when something's not public, it means that it's because we haven't actually finalized what the API is going to look like. Because Android has a commitment to backwards compatibility, once we make something public, it's very hard, and by very hard I mean practically impossible, to go and change anything once we mark it as public. If we include things as private, then we have room to go and adjust it and figure out what works best for developers before we lock it down. So anytime you see a private API, most of the time that's why. So at some point in the future, it might become public. But right now, our framework team isn't necessarily sure that that's the right way that API will look most of the time. So it's subject to change in the future. Which is also why we usually warn people, if you do insist on using private APIs, they're going to change out from underneath you. Because again, we're still changing the interface ourselves. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah.
Roman does.
Can
Okay.
you hear me? Is this working? Okay. So another thing is that since this is part of the support package, it's the support package source is there, and you can take the support package and modify it as you see fit. But like Trevor said, even if something is provided in the support package, you still want to be careful about using it because there's usually a reason for that. But having said that, on the other side of the coin, anything that's in the support package can change as well. So we can potentially modify, remove, change APIs in the support package between different revisions. Obviously, we'll try not to do that so that you don't have to modify your code when upgrading to the latest version of the support package. But it is something that's kind of not guaranteed to be set in stone. But the framework, of course, has more guarantees.
Right. Okay. Next question is from Pedro in London. Are there any implementation or performance differences when apps that use the compatibility library run on a 4.0 device? In other words, is there a difference in using native fragments versus compatibility fragments? And this is not just limited to the compatibility class or to the fragment class. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Not noticeable. I haven't really ever tried benchmarking it, but having run both side by side, I didn't feel a difference on the Galaxy Nexus at least.
Okay. But of course, there is a slight difference in implementation for some of the classes in there. So things aren't necessarily going to be 100% the same, but we strive to make it as close as possible. So anytime you see something that doesn't work the way it should when using the native APIs versus the compatibility version, definitely file a bug and let us know. To our knowledge, the compatibility fragments should work identically to non-compatibility fragments.
I think a gotcha you need to watch out for is that right at the start you need to extend fragment activity instead of activity. That's probably the biggest visible difference.
Yes. So I don't know if the mics are picking up Sparky over there, but he said just watch out that when you create your activity using the compatibility library, be sure to use the compatibility activity, right? No, fragment activity. Yes, use fragment activity instead of just regular activity. Otherwise, things will not work properly. So that is a very good point. All right. Next question is from a name I can't quite pronounce. Wandy? From Spain. Okay. I'm curious about what exclusive features for Android 4.0 uses Chrome for Android so that it can't be targeted to Android 2.2. That's an excellent question. Probably a question best asked to somebody on the Chrome team. I'm hesitant to go and comment on the Chrome app when we're not on the Chrome team and we don't know the exact details there. But I do know that it does use some APIs that aren't available on older devices. The one that comes right to the top of my head is that it has an accelerated canvas. And accelerated canvas wasn't introduced until Android 4.0. So I don't know what else they're using, but that one is definitely a prime candidate for one of the reasons it might not work on older devices. But really, you should ask somebody from the Chrome team, and they could actually give you an authoritative answer. All right. Pedro from London asks, what's the most up-to-date recommendation in terms of creating, managing, and showing dialogues for an app using compatibility fragments, or just regular fragments? I'd like to create a system that would make it so that those tasks effortless, but fragment dialogues don't make it easy.
Does he need dialog fragment class?
That's a good question. Yeah, there is a dialog fragment. Yeah, so the consensus here seems to be to use dialog fragments. So I'm not sure if that's what you're trying to use or not. If you're trying to use regular dialogues, do switch to dialog fragments. And if you are using dialog fragments and are still having problems, again, feel free to hop on the live stream here and let us know what problems you're having in particular, and then we can probably give you a bit more detail. All right. Unless anybody has any other thoughts on that, we can move on. All right. Adam from New York asks, now that we have access to the calendar API in ICS, I wanted to work with it. However, there seems to be no publicly accessible broadcast intent that fires to let us know that some new calendar items were modified. What's the best way to accomplish this?
Hi, that was my question actually, and I have like a Stack Overflow link that I put up there, so I don't know if that's helpful to people, but that's basically kind of a workaround I have, but in order to do that, I have to have a service running in the background all the time.
Okay. So for those watching live, or the recorded version for that matter, could you give us a bit more details about what your workaround you found was?
Sure, it's actually in that Stack Overflow link. If you're able to click on that, it's basically using the content observer and just having a content observer listening to the calendar's event content URI.
Okay. So then you're just detecting
which works, right? And then basically whenever a sync happens, I get notified and I can update my display and even do background processing if my app isn't open. But the problem with that is just leaving the service open all the time isn't generally a great way of handling that.
Yep, that's definitely good feedback. I'll let the framework team know about that and let them know that people are asking for a broadcast intent to go and get sent when something changes there. But that does sound like a good workaround in the meantime. I'm not sure why we didn't include that, whether or not there was some actual reason behind it or it's just an oversight. So I'll look into that a little bit more for you, but it's definitely good feedback.
My guess is, go ahead.
I was just going to say that in general, I mean, so a general solution to this would be, you have some sort of like manifest level receiver or something that you set up for any time like content changes under a certain URL, right?
Right.
So like whether it be for contacts or calendar or whatever. I don't know if there is actually reasoning for not adding something like that, but one of the issues that I can see is that can be triggered potentially very, very quickly in rapid succession. If you're
especially if it's the initial sync.
Right, that's right, that's right. So, I mean, there is something to be said there. Having said that, I mean, it seems reasonable that for certain use cases we would allow that. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know if there's
Yeah. So we'll pass that feedback along at least, and see what the framework team has to say about that.
Yeah, and just one more thing. So in the Stack Overflow, I also noted that there was some kind of intent fired, but it wasn't being able to be caught by any of my broadcast receivers. So it was the provider changed action, and I'm just wondering if that's private to the system, or if I should be able to do that and there's something wrong with my code.
Is anybody familiar with that intent? No? Yeah, I think we'd have to look into it a little bit more to determine whether or not it's private or not. I certainly haven't heard of it before, but that doesn't mean that it's not intended to be private or public. So, yeah, we'll look into it a little bit more, try and find some more information for you. Generally speaking, though, I mean, if it's not mentioned in any of our documentation, then it's probably private. But actually, are you able to find that anywhere, Alex?
I was not, no.
Okay. So since it's not listed anywhere, that's probably a sign that it's a private intent. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right. Martino from Italy asks, are there any news regarding future updates to the compatibility library? It'd be great to see preference fragment and pre-honeycomb action bar support included in it.
This falls under the general category of we don't really discuss roadmap or future issues. Let's see.
Yep.
Both of those would be neat to have. I definitely agree. With at least with Action Bar, there are some third-party libraries available that are pretty popular. The local favorite here, I guess not an official recommendation, but just sort of the local favorite would be Action Bar Sherlock. It's definitely worth looking into.
Yep, Action Bar Sherlock is definitely an excellent option for action bars. There's also the
Green
Droid, and then there's one other one too, which I'm familiar with. Action Bar Compat, correct? Yes. So those are the three recommendations we usually give for Action Bar support for compatibility purposes. And again, we are continuously improving the compatibility library, but we can't go into any details as to what's planned there. So you just have to stay tuned. All right. Chris from Idaho asks, will developers see... oh, actually, I skipped one. No, I didn't. It just moved. What are the challenges associated with building an IDE for Android on Android? Something like Eclipse and a Bluetooth keyboard seems like a much shorter tool chain, especially when you're writing a USB host app. And I think the challenges there mostly is just somebody has to sit down and do it. Writing an IDE is not a particularly simple app. Initially, you'd have to go and port over a compiler, and it's a little bit CPU intensive, though I think that's not the biggest concern. I think it's mostly just going and porting everything over, writing a UI, even if even ignoring just all the autocomplete logic and all the other the goodies that go into an IDE, it's still a lot of work. So I think somebody just has to sit down and do it. Sounds like an awesome idea for an open source app if you want to start one. But yeah, I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't work.
I would think that with our sandbox security model that you would have a hard time getting it work on a non-rooted device.
So Sparky was saying that it might not work on a non-rooted device, and I'm actually not entirely sure about that. You will have to. I'm not sure you'll be able to do debugging, but I think if you're just trying to go and write something, hit run, and have it launch on the app, you'll have to go through Package Manager, have it pop up in the install dialog. There are some technical issues you'll have to work around as far as the security model goes, but I don't think it's impossible. So, I mean, does anybody else have any thoughts on? Yeah. So, I mean, you will have to take that into account, definitely. And I'm not entirely sure how you'd get debugging working, which isn't to say it's impossible, just that I think you could run into problems there. And it's worth researching further. But even then, I think you could do something. It's just a matter of somebody actually sitting down and doing it.
I think the other main challenge there would be that the IDE, you'd ultimately be working on a pretty tiny screen. And developers like big monitors and multiple monitors, and trying to write code and debug stuff on, 10-inch screen, I think, is the biggest that we have right now, for like a 10-inch tablet. It seems like the inconvenience would outweigh the inconvenience of programming on a desktop computer or laptop, and then continuously copying the file over to the Android device. If some UI ninja could find a way around that, it could be absolutely an awesome application.
Yep. Now, moving on to the second part of this question, though, so the reason that it sounds like Chris wants to do this is because he wants to write a USB host app. And if you're writing a USB host app, that means that your USB port is in use, which means that you can't connect to it over ADB, which is actually not entirely true. There is an ADB over TCP option. It's not very well publicized, and I'm not entirely sure it works on unrooted devices. So you might have to go and create a custom build for your device. Just download the AOSP source code. But that said, actually yes, I'm sure I think you actually do need root to go and do this. But you can go and launch ADBD, which is the ADB daemon, and tell it to listen on a TCP port. And then on the desktop version of ADB, there's an ADB connect command. And you can tell it to connect to a specific IP and port number and basically just bind to the ADB service on that phone over TCP. So even if your USB port is in use, you can actually get a debugging connection that way. So, and I think even though it's not well publicized, there are some docs out there on it. I just searched for ADB connect because that's the command used to go and establish that connection. And you should find some more information on how to get that to work. And that'll definitely help if you're trying to go and write a USB host app. So hopefully that gives you a nudge in the right direction there. Okay. Next question from Mitch. Will developers see improved tools that will allow for better applications? For example, can we expect the Android emulator to get better? Or are we stuck with what we have? Also adding on to that, can we expect to see an Android design builder?
Clearly a fan of our current set of tools right there. Yeah. This sort of falls under the can't discuss roadmap. Like we can't say, we have something launching next month, right? Even if we did. But all of our tools, I think, have shown iterative and gradual improvement since launch. The Eclipse plugin is so much better now than it was, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And I don't expect that trend to end anytime soon.
Yeah. So
make sure you're up to date on your, because things like the layout, the interactive layout manager have been updated recently. Take a look at that. That's actually really handy. I find it handy just throwing together a layout quickly without do a lot of XML coding or get the rough version of it. So check out the tools thing in the documentation area in particular. There's a bunch of information about the new tools that are out there. There's also, the tools team puts out a wiki where they're prototyping new tools and putting new things out there. So if you dig a little deeper into the release, deeper into the release notes, you'll find links to that stuff, the new things that are coming out that they're working on. They're in beta in some cases. So make sure you check that out.
That will be at tools.android.com. And as Joe points out, what isn't immediately obvious to a lot of developers is that in addition to all the stuff you can download from the SDK, you have to separately go in and update the Eclipse plugin via ADT, I think it is, in order to see things like the new layout manager and trace view, all the stuff that's built into Eclipse. It's kind of a separate download, and it's its own update flow. So you have to remember to do that if you want to see the new awesome integrations with Eclipse.
Okay. So the short answer there is yes, you will see improvements. We can't tell you what. But there will be some. It will get better.
We can't tell you what.
We can't tell you why it'll get better. We can't tell you what we're doing. But we can tell you that it will improve over time because we have a whole team that works on the open source tools there, or for the development tools. And I'll also add that they do all of their commits in the open. So if you go to the Android source tree, you can actually see what they're working on. And if you're really inclined, you can download the bleeding edge stuff right off of our Git repository. I don't normally recommend you do that. Stuff will break. But it is all there if you want to take a look and see what's coming. So next question. Ian from Minneapolis says, our app makes heavy use of SD card-based SQLite databases, and we're running into performance issues. CPU is pegged with 50% usage, going to MMCQD and the other to our app. Do you have any tips for handling lots of SD card I/O, especially with SQLite? You can always not put your SQLite database on the SD card.
Yeah, to me that question sort of translates into, do you have advice on how to make the slow way fast? And it's don't do it the slow way.
Right.
I mean, obviously this is context dependent, and I understand there's probably like a good reason that you have these databases on the SD card, but it's worth thinking about, can any of that be not on the SD card? Can you have, a separate database, like maybe a local cache of stuff that you load?
Right. And I mean, the SD card is never going to be as fast as internal memory.
Yeah.
For one, it's, a lot of devices have their memory, or particularly RAM, but even flash is a lot closer to the processor, so you have a bigger bus there. Whereas when you talk to the SD card, you're going through several layers of abstraction that eventually make its way to the SD card. On top of that, SD cards are usually using FAT, which is not the world's best file system. But even then, that's a minor issue. Mostly, I think it's just the actual I/O bandwidth available there. But even on top of that, too, you have no idea what type of SD card the user has stuck in their phone. It could be a Class 1 bargain basement SD card that just has no throughput whatsoever. So if you really do need performance, the SD card is not the way to go. The SD card is bulk storage, and as such, you need to keep in mind it is going to be slow. Now, some devices do have their SD card actually mapped to internal storage, and in that case, you probably won't have that problem. But if it is external storage, you're stuck with the fact that it is external storage, and you have the constraints thereof. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to ask, in general, there's some security implications in leaving your data in the SD card. It's unclear what the nature of data that we're talking about here, but in general, it's not, good practice to do it, to store data on the SD card if you're talking about something like database.
I think even if the intent is to make the data accessible to other applications, the correct way would be to use a content provider and still keep the raw database in a local space.
Yeah. And if you really do insist on leaving your SD card, your database on the SD card, maybe look at copying some of that data into memory. You can create memory-backed SQLite databases, or possibly look into some other caching solution and then flush your data back out to the SD card once you're done with it. Anytime you're going right into disk, it's going to be slower, right? And it's not a problem unique to Android. It's just something as developers we have to deal with. So unfortunately, there's no magic bullet there. It's just a matter of tuning your app. All right. Alan asks. Oh, wait.
Actually, we have a big one in the chat.
Gigantic question in chat. I can't even read the whole thing.
Reto, can you scroll up a little bit? And
yeah, maybe since you're on the Hangout, if you have a microphone, maybe you just want to go ahead and read the question to us live if you have that ability. If not, we can go ahead and read it for you. All right. The lack of audio there tells me you don't have a mic. So, so Anton asks, I have a question about a possible accessibility I found in ICS. I am working for KNFB, Kurzweil National Federation of the Blind, and our ebook reader allows for continuous TTS, so text-to-speech, reading through Android's accessibility services. We need to roll our own accessibility service to be able to get notified when a TTS utterance stops speaking. So, for example, auto-turning pages and such. Our accessibility service is package-specific and is not registered as a default accessibility service. On Android 3 and lower, it works fine because a package-specific service can handle an accessibility event, and the default service won't receive it. However, on ICS, both our service and, we need to scroll down now. So on ICS, both our service and the default service, TalkBack, will receive it. This causes the utterance to be spoken twice, once by our service and once by TalkBack. Is the accessibility team aware of this issue? The answer there is I don't know. We're not the accessibility team. I can't tell you if they're aware of the issue or not. Looking around the room, I'm not sure if anybody here is aware of it. Are you?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Can you get the audio on this one? Okay, so one thing to realize, and hopefully you're already aware of this, but ICS accessibility APIs changed in that from the previous version, right? There are some new things that you have to do in order to get permissions to do an accessibility service. I'm not sure why you're not doing it, why you're not extending accessibility service directly, which is probably the correct way to go. Maybe you've got some technical reasons for that. I would seriously look at trying to extend the accessibility service for doing this kind of stuff because of the reason you're asking, because of this issue that you're running into. Without knowing a little bit more about what you're attempting to do here, it's hard for me to speak about that. But I know that we've made quite a few changes with ICS, and so some of the things that may have worked on previous versions don't quite are going to be a little bit different.
Okay, he says he does extend accessibility service.
Oh, you do extend. Okay, so you are doing that properly. Yeah, again, this is a little hard for me to do because a little bit out of my depth in terms of how to override that properly. Maybe we can get some more information from you and follow up with you later about that.
Yeah. And another thing we might look into too is every now and then we do invite individual teams to go and join us on the Hangout here. So maybe at some point in the future we can actually get somebody from the accessibility service to sit down with us. Right. And we could have a chat. So we'll invite them and see if they're interested in joining us sometime.
And until we can actually figure out an answer to the question, if you could go ahead and link or ask the question on Stack Overflow and then link to it from the comment section of our Google Plus page, it'll be easier for us to go in and find it and answer in detail. Very welcome.
Yeah. All right. So next question from Alan. I know how to make an indeterminate progress wheel appear in the top corner of the action bar, but I can't figure out how to change the size. Right now, it's the size of one of the small, or it's the size of the one in the Gmail app, but I want it to be as small as the one in the G Plus app. Roman has a comment on
that. So I just posted a response to this in Moderator, but there's an example of this in the IO app source code. But basically, you just have a custom view for one of your actions. I'm guessing that's how you do it now. But for that, in that custom view, you just have a parent container, like a frame layout or whatever, and then inside of that you put the progress bar. So you have the progress bar with a gravity of center, and then whatever size you want, whether it be 16 dips or 32 dips or whatever, and you just have it centered inside of that view. So it's really just up to you. You just have to provide the proper layout for it.
Okay, cool. All right. Next question is from Zelflasher from New Zealand. When updating an app and pushing it to the market, the user has to re-download the whole app. Instead, is there a way to apply an incremental update or patch to our application through the market or custom server? If so, what would be the process? So, as far as Android Market is concerned, the answer right now is no. When, as you mentioned, when you change an app in Android Market, it does have to re-download the whole thing. Now, there is a way you could do this. You can do dynamic class loading, so host your DEX files somewhere on your own server, download those, and then load them at runtime. The problem with this is it's really, really scary from a security perspective. You have no idea if somebody is sitting in between on the connection and has replaced your code with theirs, and then you're running untrusted code on the device. It's also technically challenging, but the big concern is mostly security. So I can't really recommend doing this. It is possible. You can do it, but you shouldn't. So right now the advice is you really should go and just push out an update through Android Market.
Also, if the size of the app is a concern, this is hypothetically speaking, but I'm going to take a guess and say that it's a game or something else that merits like a 20 plus meg download. In that case, it might be worth hosting your assets like images, sounds, whatever, like a downloadable zip, and then having the core APK be really small,
right? So
that you can incrementally download and just like fire updates to Android Market.
That is a very common technique. There's pretty much no harm in hosting your application assets, so images, videos, anything that's large media-related data outside of the APK. You see it all the time in games apps, largely because you see a lot of games that are too large to fit in an APK. And since it's not executable code, security is less of a concern. I still would be a little cautious there and probably serve it from an SSL source. You never know if somebody's found some exploit in our code that does image loading, and things like that have happened in the past, not necessarily on Android but on other platforms. It's rare, but it's not unheard of. So a little bit of caution is useful there. But for the most part, as long as it's not executable code, you're okay doing that. But I would be very cautious if the reason you want to do this is because your classes are too big. But then again, if your classes are too big, what are you doing? So I'm going to go with Alex's recommendation here and assume that this is because of media files, in which case just go ahead and host them on your own server and load them in. And in that case, you also can go and do incremental diffs, and at that point, it's up to your app. Whatever you want to do is up to you. Right?
Yeah. Also, like one last thing, I would say if you're not above 20 megs, as technologies like 3G and 4G and LTE get more and more ubiquitous, and just downloading apps to your phone gets faster and faster, it's not going to be a problem for most users. Like, so many of them have auto update turned on anyway. It's not as though they're going to be, stuck for a half hour waiting for it to download and then just, give up, cancel, and never use your app again or anything like that. So, I mean, just you can have faith that your users will wait it out or let it download in the background, and they will see the new version of your app, and you'll be okay.
Yeah. Which brings up actually another point, and that is if you're going to be downloading really large files in your app, assuming you're targeting Gingerbread or above, please consider using the System Download Manager. It takes care of a lot of really odd edge cases, as well as handling connection changes, determining whether or not the user's on Wi-Fi or not. It takes care of a lot of things that are actually a little hard to get right for larger downloads. So again, if you're targeting Gingerbread or above, consider just asking the System Download Manager to go and grab your resources for you and then notify you when that's done. I know one of our advocates who's not here right now, Dan Galpin, ported the Download Manager back to pre-Gingerbread. So that's possible too, though there is a bit more work there. And hopefully one day he'll go and actually just release that as a project as an open source project. But for the moment, at the very least, if you are targeting Gingerbread or above, definitely use Download Manager if you can. Right? So next question. Is it possible to add menu options defined in a fragmented action bar? If so, is it also possible to do this in a backwards compatible way? The sample is only addressing adding activity menu options to the action bar.
The first answer is yes. You can modify the action bar menu items whenever you want.
I think that the question though is if you define your menu options inside of a fragment, is it possible to get them to appear in the action bar?
Yeah.
Does it? Okay.
Okay. So in API demos, we have an example of that. I don't really understand what it means by implementing in the backwards compatible way 2.2 to 4. There is no built-in action bar in 2.2, so...
Right. Well, the action bar is just menu options anyway. The API is the same.
Right.
Which
so
means that if you're using the
or...
compatibility library, it should still work the same because it's the same API calls. So just as long as you do have fragment support, which is what our support package gives you, it should work. So...
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Stephen from UK asks, I have an app with many activities, and one of the requirements, or no, yes. So weird when they move like that. What's the proper way to deal with orientation changes in the live wallpaper? Specifically, what's the order of events? I'm having issues with apps close as I seem to be given incorrect sizes in the surface changed event. I've actually never written the live wallpaper myself, so I'm not sure I can comment on this. Yeah.
You guys?
Okay, I don't think anybody in this room is actually an expert in live wallpapers, unfortunately, so I'm not sure any of us can tell you off the top of our heads, unfortunately. We'll add to the list of things we'll look up after the show.
And as with the other questions, if you could write the question in Stack Overflow and link to it from the G+ comments, that way we have a place that we can answer it, you'll be able to see it easily.
All right, Andy from California asks, I have an app with many activities, and one of the requirements is to completely exit the app 5 minutes after I went into the background. What's the best technique to achieve this behavior? Thank you from Andy. All right. So I'm just trying to understand what you're trying to do here. I mean, so your app goes in the background, and then 5 minutes later you just want to terminate it. And I can't think of why you want to do that. It sounds a little odd to me. Our usual advice is don't worry about forcing your application to close. Services, of course, you do have to keep in mind when you want to stop your service. But activities are automatically stopped by the system as soon as it determines that they're no longer needed. It's the same reason that we usually advise that people don't use task killers, because Android takes care of most of that automatically. So if you're watching the live stream, feel free to hop on and tell us why you need to do this. But usually the advice is don't. So Roman has something to say, it looks like.
Yeah, another thing to add is, I mean, the most important thing really is to just make sure your activities are lightweight, so that, and what that really means is, when you get an on pause, if you have if you're holding on to, instances of objects that are doing stuff like network stuff or anything like that, then just kill them off if they're not needed. Just make sure that your activities, when they're foregrounded, they're doing whatever they need to be doing, but when they're backgrounded, they're not doing anything more than they need to. And if there's more stuff you need to do in the background, use a service.
Right. Rado has something too, it looks like.
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing, which is, let's go out on a limb and suggest that there may be a circumstance where this is legitimate, like maybe a licensing thing, where if the application isn't in the foreground, they have to exit or security. In fact, I'm guessing this has something to do with banking. So if the app is in the background for more than, how long did he say, 5 minutes, and they have to log out and start again. So in that circumstance, the practical way I would suggest doing that is to have something like a singleton within your application, which just effectively reference counts your activities. So keep track of on pause and on stop whenever it goes into the background. Then you can start the counter, and then each time you have another activity go in the foreground, you reset that counter.
You also use Alarm Manager to schedule something like 5 minutes away and then cancel it on resume in all of your activities.
I've heard issues of Alarm Manager calls getting discarded under certain circumstances, so it's not 100% reliable.
But the Alarm Manager calls getting discarded only happen when your process has been killed. So
right.
If the process
So in that case, the requirement's been met.
Exactly. So that's actually a good idea. I think set an Alarm Manager whenever you're on pause and on resume. Start it up again, or other way around.
It's actually there's kind of a similar pattern with doing things with delay. Like let's say you wanted to, let's say 5 seconds after inactivity on your UI, like after the user stops touching things on your UI, you can kind of cancel a method, or I guess a post delayed call. So what you can do is you have a handler, and every time there's UI interaction, you post you delay a message to that handler to say, like, kind of 5 seconds later, like, hide things or whatever. So like, as you touch things, as you move your fingers around, you can kind of cancel and reset up that delay, so that that there's always going to be 5 seconds of no interaction before that hide or whatever happens. It's just a similar pattern. I'm not sure if I explained it very well, but yeah.
Cool. All right. So we're at about 15 minutes left now. So this is a good time to remind anybody who's watching live. If you want to go and join us on the live stream and ask questions in person, you're certainly welcome to, especially if we haven't gotten to your question yet and you don't think we will. We do love to get live questions. So just feel free to hop on if you do want to ask us something. Again, you have to be in Rado's extended circles right now to go and do that, so just post a comment on the feed, and he'll go ahead and add you. But let's go ahead and get back to the moderator queue. I wrote a transit app that grabs real-time bus schedules from my local transit authority using a REST API. Unfortunately, their servers go down often. Joy, what error verbiage can I use to tell the user that their API is down and not my app that's at fault? And this is Ryan from Winnipeg in Canada. So first thing, that doesn't sound too good for the Winnipeg bus system.
Try caching results locally in this live network refresh data so that you'll have at least something.
Yeah, you need the mic, Sparky.
I was going to suggest that maybe for those occasions when the network resources aren't available, you use cache data, and just whenever the network is up, bring yourself up to date, so that even if you can't give the user the most live up-to-date results, you can give them something. I mean, how often do transit schedules change, really?
Right. And that actually brings up a good point in general. For most apps, it's not a good idea to assume that you have a persistent internet connection. Unlike desktop computers, which mostly have a DSL or cable or other always-on connection, the cell network is radio, and radio doesn't reach everywhere. It reaches most places, but if you go into a tunnel or you're in an office building or just happen to be in a really bad spot, you might not have a good network connection. And I see a lot of developers assuming that they always do have a connection, and you shouldn't do that. So whenever possible, look into using things like sync adapters and try and cache as much data as possible. And then optimistically update it in the background so that the user always has their data available. And that just gets you a much better user experience. And then if you don't have the best results, you could go and display a notification somewhere in your app that's saying that the results are delayed a little bit. Or even like Gmail, that it just shows you what it has available, and then just goes and syncs stuff in the background. And if you're a little bit behind, it'll catch up eventually. But if you really want to know, to answer your original question though, if you really want to know what a good error message display is, I think probably the best one would just be say network connection unavailable, or alternatively it looks like the servers are down. I don't know, Roman, what would you actually recommend as an error message?
I'm going to let Joe talk in a second, but the one thing I will say is that this is definitely something we can expand on in the Android design site. Yeah. I think there's some stuff that we can do more around error messages, but
yeah, we do have some text in there already.
We have writing guidelines.
We do have writing guidelines that tell you how you should phrase stuff. I'd have to sit down for a couple minutes and think about what the best way to express it is, unless somebody else here has a good sample sentence off the top of their head. But I mean, there are guidelines in there about how you should, what type of wording you should use, what sort of tone you should use, and you should definitely take those into account. But
so I was going to actually answer the question a different way and say that it's always going to be your fault, right? The developer as a developer, your user is always going to blame you if something goes wrong. So I think it's on you to try to work around these issues, and I think we've actually giving you a couple ideas about how to do this, caching, assuming that the API is not going to be available all the time, and just making your application work around that so that you don't have to display that kind of an error message. I think would be your ideal solution. That would be my advice to you. It's not the error message that's the problem, it's the fact that you have to show an error message at all, right? So that's my main advice on that one.
I would agree that that's really good advice. The thing is, though, that if you detect this situation, you should at least log it so that you can look at a user's problems with the application, maybe. And in general, I would say that developers should log unusual situations so that in case they have to diagnose a problem, they've got something to look at. And in terms of localization and for other reasons too, if you have to issue an error message or a log message, put a number next to it so that users can just say, I got error 601, rather than having to try and remember what the error message was. So those are just some hints. But yeah, I'd say, try to deal with it gracefully. That's usually what we recommend. And make a log, though, so that you can track problems that people are running into.
Okay, cool. So I think we've answered that pretty thoroughly now. So Josh Brown has a live question on chat right now for us. And Josh, as usual, when people hop on here, I'm going to say, do you actually want to go and read it out to us since you're right there? If not, we can read it out for you. But you might not have audio, so we'll go ahead and read it for you in that case. So Josh says, this is a little meta, but when the full stream is posted, and I assume he's talking about the full stream of this event, it can include a table of contents with times. This way we can tell at a glance whether or not there's information we are interested in without having to watch the whole hour, including the times would allow us to jump right to the relevant points. And I see Rado there with the mic in hand, ready to answer this. So
yeah, thanks, Josh. That's actually really useful feedback, and we've heard that a few times. We are working to try and make this content more accessible. I think transcripts are probably going to be an easier way forward for us than going through and manually doing a table of contents. I've done that for a few of our Hangouts. So things like the Friday review, where we're reviewing less than 10 apps. We can do that sort of thing for Q&A sessions like this. It can take a long time to go through and actually index it all. So we're looking at ways to be able to surface this content better. Things like transcription is probably the way we're going to go. So we'll hopefully continue to improve as we move forward.
Josh says thank you, and we say you're welcome. So, all right. So next question is from Benny in Germany. Or no, yes it is. Why is IC menu refresh, for example, not public? Roman.
That's one of the. So when I first started working on Android, this was one of the first questions I asked. I was like, why is it not there? Like, there's IC menu, pretty much everything else, but not refresh. I don't think there's a great answer to this. I think it's just something that was never there. Like, it was probably just omitted in the very beginning. It was never really added. What's more important right now is that really, as of Honeycomb or later, you really shouldn't be using IC menu anything from the framework, because it's really in this kind of intermediate style between HoloLight and HoloDark, basically because that's the best we can do. We can't select one visual style that looks okay, that is legible on both HoloLight and HoloDark. So it's really not a good idea to use anything from the framework there. What I will say, though, is that we have released an icon pack on the Android design site that shows you, that gives you those resources, including refresh, for both HoloLight and HoloDark. And along with that, if you have some sort of other theme that that's not white or black, maybe it's like red or something, you can take the source artworks and apply your own styling to that. For the core iconography behind refresh, as well as the other things in ICS, that's all at developer.android.com/design under the iconography section.
Actually, I found an explanation on the UI guidelines icon design menu page. Basically, it's because the actual icons that IC menu refresh and other ones like that refer to can change between platform versions. And what they're trying to avoid is you reference an icon to put in your app that's actually in the framework and not in your own res folder or anything like that. And then your app looks different on Froyo than it does on Gingerbread, and it does on Honeycomb, et cetera, et cetera. The recommendation is that if you really want to use these icons, you yank them from the SDK and put them in your own application, in your own res folder. And that way it'll be the same icon across versions of Android.
And along with that, basically, I think that the extended reason for that is basically if you use like IC menu refresh or IC menu whatever, you're undoubtedly going to need more icons, right? Custom icons for your app. Right. Generally apps need more than just what the framework can offer. And so if you use what's built into the framework and some of your own stuff, then that can change not only across platform versions, but across devices and things like that. So.
Okay, cool. So we're down to about 5 minutes. I see that James just joined the group chat, so if you have a question you want to ask us live, now would be the time to do it. But otherwise, looks like Adrian from Costa Rica wants to know if it's possible, and how to alter the voice during a call using Android. He wants to build an app that, when opened, can call somebody and adding a voice effect to it. And I believe the answer to that is actually you can't.
I don't think so, no.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of reasons for this. One, I think, is security. But beyond that, also, a lot of phones, I believe, actually have a direct hardware connection between the microphone and the chip that does the calling. So I don't think there's actually physically a way to go and intercept that pathway. Does anybody else have any more detail on that than beyond that?
Every solution that I've seen on Stack Overflow or on the Android Developers Forum all say that like all workarounds have to do with physically playing audio out the speaker and picking it up in the mic, or vice versa.
Okay. So there's your answer. Sorry we don't have a better answer for you, but unfortunately that is the way things are right now. So next question from the streets of Boston, Cambridge. I asked this question during the Hangout already, but
the
accessibility bug, right.
Thanks for posting it.
Yes, we got it. Thank you. All right. Adam from Boston asks, the Android 4 CDD, so that's for those who don't know, that's the compatibility definition. It's what we ask vendors to go and use to certify that their device is an Android device. It states that devices can only provide a thermometer if the sensor reports the temperature of the CPU. How does it affect devices which include an ambient sensor? That's a good question. I don't know.
I do not know the answer to that.
Well, my understanding is that the ambient sensor replaces the temperature sensor, or at least it does what a lot of people intuit that the temperature sensor should do. So the thermometer is always supposed to have been measuring the temperature of the CPU, not ambient temperature. That wasn't always clear, and some of the early devices did actually use it as something of an ambient sensor. So the ambient sensor is the right thing to use if you want to measure external temperature. If you want to measure internal temperature, then you use the thermometer sensor class.
Yeah. So I'd have to check the exact wording on the CDD here, but it sounds like what it should say, and if it doesn't, we'll file a bug against this, is that if it's using the traditional temperature, it should be the CPU temperature, and if it's using ambient temperature, it should be the ambient temperature, and just make sure that those are clearly, the device name is clearly linked with the device purpose. I don't think, there's certainly no harm in having an ambient temperature sensor in a device. The important thing is just making sure that whatever type of temperature sensor you ask for is the type of temperature sensor you're getting. So, yeah, we'll double check, make sure that that's appropriately worded. All right, we're down to the last 2 minutes now, so I think we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions, depending on how quickly we get through these. Rand from Israel asks, is it possible to use both Wi-Fi and 3G interfaces spontaneously? Or simultaneously, excuse me. I would like to have the ability to specify in my Java code which interface to use when I open a socket. Can be done without reading or modifying the OS. And to my knowledge, the answer there is no. I believe the OS manages that connection for you and provides a single network interface. If you want to use more than one network interface, unfortunately, we don't provide a way to do that right now. That being said, actually I can think of some good reasons you might want to do this, but yeah, unfortunately it's not something we support right now, so that's the answer. As usual, my advice is if there's something you really want to see, go to b.android.com, that's our public bug tracker, search for the issue there. I suspect in this case somebody's probably already reported it, and star it. So the number of stars on an issue is used to go and vote for things. Let our developers know that you want it. We can't guarantee that we'll add it. Sometimes there's good reasons for this stuff, and sometimes it's just a matter of priorities. But do let us know that you at least are looking for it. All right. And Ricardo from Portugal asks, is it possible to replace or at least disable the overscroll glow that appears in list views, scroll views, grid views, etc.? I can't for the life of me find a way to do either one, replace or disable. Okay. I do know there is a way to go and detect when overflow occurs, but yeah, Roman, do you know if there's a way to actually shut it off? Or
yeah, so I think in the comments to this, there was basically there's an overscroll mode. I forgot what it's called, but there's an overscroll mode that talks about this. I don't remember if there's a way to modify the actual drawable that's used. I believe there is. If you look at the system resources, basically if you just do some reverse engineering in the source code, you should be able to find it. But I also should say that the support library, it has something called Edge Effect, and I think that uses the glows. So you should look at how ViewPager does its glows. That should give you some more clues there. But I mean, I don't have a very concrete answer. But yeah, that's where I'd look.
Okay. Oh, and Anton says, we tried to disable overscroll mode, but it just doesn't work well on Samsung with TouchWiz devices. Okay.
Well, so I think that the overscroll stuff that was really like built into the framework pretty early, as of like 2.2, 2.3. But the first set of APIs that were around that were used for that were really released around, I think, around Honeycomb. So I would expect that there's very little you can do about overscroll for 2.2 and 2.3, unfortunately.
Okay, and James is typing, so let's see here. He does have a question, and this will be our last question. Is there a hook that will allow me to load a service with a different class loader? Load a service with a different class loader? That's a good question. Yeah, my intuition is that it might not be able to do it. Now, your service could go and load something else with a different class loader, but I don't think that your primary class for your service is going to be able to go and specify which class loader it gets loaded with itself. So at best, you could try and do some sort of shim there that does it for you. but I don't think there's any way to go and tell the system what you want to use for your initial class. And he's typing, waiting for the typing. Yeah, shim is what I was thinking, but thought that since there was something for activity, there might be something for service. Yeah, I haven't heard of anything, and it doesn't sound like anybody here has heard of anything either. So I'm just gonna go out and guess here that it's probably not possible. Yep, you're totally welcome. All right, so we are past 3 o'clock now, and that's our last question. So as usual, we hold this event every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Be sure to come on. Rado posts the link to the moderator queue, as well as I think we cross-posted on the Android Developer Google Plus page as well. So please come ask us your questions, and if at all possible, come and join us live. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you everyone for watching us today. All right, see you around.
Peace out.